Hi, friends. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Just for a moment. I want you to think about the last time life punched you so hard that you didn't know if you could get back up. Maybe it was last year. Maybe it was last month. Maybe it was this morning. Maybe it was the day you got that phone call that changed everything. The day the doctor said those words. The day the person you loved most looked you in the eyes and said they were leaving. The day the company let you go after 10 years of sacrifice. The day you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back at you. Go to that moment. Feel it. Don't run from it. Not yet. Now I want you to ask yourself one question. In that moment, in the darkest, most unfair, most crushing moment of your life, what did you tell yourself? What did the voice inside your head say? Because that voice, that single voice, that is everything. Open your eyes. Today I'm not here to tell you that life is fair. Because it isn't. Life is not fair. And anyone who stands on a stage and tells you otherwise is lying to you. Life is brutal. Life is random. Life does not care about your plans or your prayers or your good intentions. Rain falls on the righteous and the wicked alike. The good die young. The corrupt prosper. Children suffer through no fault of their own. Hard workers get overlooked. Honest people get betrayed. Beautiful souls get broken. Life is not fair. But here's what I've come to understand after years of struggling, failing, losing, and eventually finding my way back to something that feels like joy. Something that feels like peace. Something that feels like happiness that doesn't depend on circumstances. Here's the truth I want to give you today. Happiness was never meant to be a reward for a fair life. Happiness is a discipline you practice in the middle of an unfair one. Say that to yourself. Let it land. I grew up in a house where money was a constant source of tension. Not poverty, not wealth, just that grinding middle ground anxiety where every unexpected bill caused a fight, where my parents loved each other but were slowly worn down by the weight of not enough. I watched my father work 2 jobs for 15 years, 2 jobs. This man left the house before the sun came up and came home after I was asleep. 5, 6 days a week. He missed birthdays, he missed school plays, he missed the ordinary Tuesday evenings that kids need their fathers for. And I used to be angry about that. I used to think it was his choice. I used to think he loved work more than he loved us. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I sat with him one evening and he told me something that I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, "Son, every morning I drove to that first job. I thought about your face. And every night I drove home from the second job. I thought about your face. I wasn't choosing work over you. I was choosing you every single day, wearing a disguise called work." I had to excuse myself from that conversation. I went to the bathroom and I sat on the edge of that tub and I wept. Because for 20 years I had been angry at a man who was loving me in the only language he knew, with the only resources he had, in a world that had not been particularly kind to him either. Life wasn't fair to my father. He was the smartest man in most rooms he walked into. But he was black in America in the 1960s and 70s, which meant that intelligence was not enough. It was never enough. The doors that should have opened for him were shut. The opportunities that should have come to him went to men with less talent and the right skin color and the right last name and the right handshake at the right country club. My father didn't get the life he deserved, not by any fair measure. And yet, I never once heard that man say life was unfair. I never once heard him use the unfairness of his circumstances as an excuse to stop trying. I never once saw him treat his disappointments as a reason to become bitter, to become cruel, to give up on joy. He found it in small things. In Saturday morning jazz on the radio, in my mother's laughter, in a perfectly grilled piece of fish. In watching me play basketball in the driveway on summer evenings. He built a small, beautiful, meaningful life inside an unfair world, and he did it on purpose, with intention, every single day. My father taught me, without ever once delivering a lecture, that happiness is not the absence of hardship. Happiness is what you decide to water, even when the soil is dry. Now I want to talk to you about a woman named Sarah. And Sarah is not her real name, but she gave me permission to share her story, just not her identity. And I think you'll understand why in a moment. Sarah was 29 years old. She was what most people would describe as having it all. Good job, loving partner, beautiful apartment in a city she loved, Health, friends, ambition, plans, a whole future mapped out and ready. And then one afternoon, she went to the doctor for what she thought was a routine checkup, and she walked out with a diagnosis that rearranged every single thing. Now, stage 3, aggressive. Treatment needed immediately. She told me that the drive home from the doctor that day was the longest drive of her life. She said she kept looking at other cars on the highway and thinking, every single one of those people is driving somewhere like it's a normal Tuesday. Like the world didn't just tilt on its axis. Like everything didn't just change. And she went home and she sat in her apartment alone because her partner was at work and she hadn't called anyone yet. And she said she sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. Just sat there. And at some point, something shifted. She told me she can't fully explain it. She said it wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It wasn't a voice from God. It wasn't a sudden surge of courage. She said it felt more like a quiet exhale. And she said to herself out loud, to nobody, to the empty kitchen, okay, this is the hand. Now what are you going to do with it? Sarah went through 11 months of treatment. 11 months of her body being poisoned in order to be saved. She lost her hair. She lost 30 pounds. She lost her energy, her appetite, some friendships that couldn't hold the weight of her illness. And briefly, honestly, she lost her faith in almost everything. There were weeks, she told me, where getting out of bed felt like climbing Everest, where the bathroom floor became a place she knew too well, where she looked in the mirror and genuinely did not know the person looking back at her. But here's what she also did during those 11 months. She started writing. Not a journal, exactly. More like letters. Letters to her future self. Letters that said, when you're on the other side of this, here's what I want you to remember. Here's what I want you to never take for granted. Here's what mattered. Here's what didn't. Here's what I used to worry about that means absolutely nothing now. Here's what I used to overlook that I now understand is everything. She wrote about the way morning light comes through the window in October. She wrote about the sound of rain. She wrote about her grandmother's hands. She wrote about laughing until your stomach hurts. She wrote about the simple miracle of being hungry and eating something and having it taste good. She wrote about love, about what it really means, stripped of all the Hollywood nonsense, just two people choosing each other in the ordinary moments, in the hard moments, in the moments that nobody ever photographs because they don't look like anything from the outside. Sarah is in remission. She's been in remission for 4 years now. And she told me, and this is the part that stays with me, she told me, the cancer was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I would not trade who I became because of it for anything. I don't mean I'm glad it happened. I mean that I found out in the most brutal way possible what I was made of and what my life was actually worth. And now I live like I know that. Every single day. Life was deeply, profoundly unfair to Sarah. And she is one of the happiest, most present, most genuinely alive people I ever met. That is not a coincidence. Now I need you to understand something. And I need you to really hear this, because this is one of the places where a lot of motivational content goes wrong, where it tips from inspiration into dishonesty. I am not standing here telling you that suffering is secretly good for you. I am not telling you that everything happens for a reason in some cosmic prearranged sense. I don't know if it does. I don't think anyone truly does. I am not telling you that your pain is a gift, because sometimes pain is just pain. Sometimes pain is just pain. Sometimes tragedy is just tragedy. Sometimes loss is just loss. And there is no silver lining. There is no redemptive lesson. There is no higher purpose that makes it okay. What I am telling you is something different. I am telling you that regardless of whether suffering has a purpose, you have the power to give it one. You have the power to be transformed by what tries to destroy you. Not because life is fair, not because you deserve the hardship, not because the universe has some grand plan for you, but because you are a human being, and human beings have this extraordinary, almost incomprehensible capacity to take the worst things and find or make meaning inside them. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother, everything he had built in his life before. He was subjected to horrors that I cannot fully articulate, that you and I, in our most terrifying nightmares, would not fully comprehend. And in those camps, stripped of everything, robbed of everything, In conditions of absolute darkness and absolute injustice, he made an observation that became the foundation of one of the most important books ever written. He said this: everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Read that again. Sit with it. Everything can be taken. Your job, your health, your relationships, your money, your plans, your sense of safety, your sense of self, all of it can be stripped away. But the one thing that no circumstance, no cruelty, no injustice, no catastrophe can take from you is your ability to choose what you do with what remains. That is yours. That has always been yours. The question is whether you're using it. I want to talk to you about happiness for a moment because I think we've been sold a false version of it, and that false version is making us miserable. We've been told by advertising, by social media, by the stories we consume, by the culture we swim in, that happiness is a feeling, that it's something you feel, the way you feel warm, the way you feel full after a good meal. And because it's a feeling, it's dependent on circumstances. Good things happen, you feel happy. Bad things happen, you don't. And this means happiness is always at the mercy of what life decides to give you, which means you're always vulnerable. Because life will decide to give you bad things, it always does, eventually. But here's what the research actually shows. Here's what the philosophers have known for thousands of years. Here's what the people who radiate genuine joy have figured out. Happiness is not primarily a feeling. Happiness is a practice. It is something you do. It is a set of decisions and habits and orientations toward life that you cultivate, the same way you cultivate physical fitness, the same way you cultivate a skill. It requires effort. It requires intention. It requires showing up for it especially when you don't feel like it. The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world, the emperor of Rome, and yet he spent his mornings writing to himself, coaching himself, reminding himself of principles that would keep him oriented toward what mattered, that would keep him from being derailed by the chaos and injustice and difficulty of life. He wrote things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing for himself every morning, recommitting to the practice of being a human being of quality in a world that was trying to knock him off course. Now, I'm not saying you need to become a Stoic philosopher. I'm saying that the wisest, most grounded, most genuinely content people across history, across cultures, across centuries have all pointed to the same core truth, that our inner life is ours to govern, that our response to circumstances is ours to choose, and that this is where the work of happiness actually lives. Let me tell you about a different kind of unfairness. Let me tell you about the kind that is quieter, more invisible, that doesn't announce itself as tragedy but accumulates slowly, like water seeping into the walls of a house you thought was solid. I have a friend named Marcus. Marcus grew up being told he was not smart. Not by strangers, not by bullies, but by the people who were supposed to love him most. His father told him more than once in moments of frustration, in moments that perhaps his father later regretted but never took back. His father told him that he would never amount to much, that he wasn't academic, that he should just find something practical to do, and Marcus internalized that, the way children always internalize what their parents tell them. Because when you're 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, your parents are the authority on what is true about the world and about you. Marcus grew up carrying this story about himself. This false story written by someone else's fear and frustration and limitation and handed to him as if it were fact. He made decisions based on it. He didn't apply for opportunities because he assumed he wasn't good enough. He didn't finish projects because he expected failure, and failure felt like confirmation. He stayed small, not because he was small, but because he had been taught to see himself as small. And seeing himself as small made him behave in small ways which produced small results, which seemed to confirm the original story. He was in his late 30s when something cracked open. He took a class, an evening class at a community college. Just because he was bored, just because something made him do it, he still can't explain exactly why. And the professor of that class, a woman he describes as one of the most important human beings he's ever encountered, handed back his first paper with a note at the top that said, "This is exceptional thinking. You should be proud." He told me he read that sentence 5 times. 5 times. He told me he went to his car after class and sat there for 20 minutes. He told me something inside him was shaking. Something was cracking. Some wall that had been built so long ago he'd forgotten it was a wall. He'd started to think it was just his shape, his actual shape. And now here was this woman telling him the wall was not his shape at all. Marcus went back to school in his 40s. He got his degree. He built a career doing work he loves. He is not famous. He is not famous. He is not rich. By the metrics that the world usually celebrates, his story is quiet. But Marcus, when I talk to him, is one of the freest people I know. He has this lightness about him, this expansiveness, this genuine delight in ideas and conversation and possibility that is absolutely electric. He spent 30 years living inside a lie, and then he broke out of it. And the joy of that freedom, the joy of discovering in your late 30s that you are someone different than you were told you were. He said it's like being born again, but better, because this time you appreciate it. The unfairness done to Marcus was invisible. Nobody would have seen it from the outside, but it shaped his entire trajectory. And yet, when Marcus found his way to truth, when he chose with difficulty and with persistence and with more courage than we give him credit for, to revise the story he'd been handed, his life changed. That is the power I'm talking about. That is the thing I want you to feel in your chest right now. Because some of you are carrying false stories too. Stories that were handed to you by people who were doing their best, but were operating from their own wounds and their own limitations and their own fears. Stories that told you you're not smart enough, not attractive enough, not talented enough, not worthy of the kind of love or success or happiness that other people seem to access. And you've been making decisions based on those stories for years, maybe for decades. You've been shrinking yourself into the shape of a lie. What would it mean to question the story? What would it mean to say, wait, who told me this? When did I decide this was true? What evidence do I actually have that this is who I am? Because here's what I know about human beings. I know that we are almost universally worse judges of our own potential than the reality warrants. We underestimate ourselves constantly. We mistake our fear for incapacity. We mistake our inexperience for inherent limitation. We mistake the cruelty of others' words for fact. We treat the opinion of someone else's worst moment as a life sentence. You are not the worst thing anyone ever said about you. Let me say that again, because I need someone in this room or watching this somewhere in the world to actually hear it. You are not the worst thing anyone ever said about you. Now I want to talk about grief, because we cannot have an honest conversation about happiness in an unfair world without talking about grief. Because life will take things from you. It already has. People you love. Versions of yourself you were comfortable with, dreams that felt certain, futures you had planned, health you assumed would last, safety you thought you could count on. And grief is the right response to loss. Grief is not a problem to be solved. Grief is not a weakness to be overcome. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and it deserves to be honored. But there is a difference between grief and residence, between moving through loss and moving into it, unpacking your bags and deciding to live there permanently. And I have seen so many people, good people, strong people, people with so much left to give. I have seen them take up permanent residence in their grief and their bitterness and their sense of betrayal. And I have watched the life go out of their eyes over years. Not because the loss was too great to survive, but because they never made the decision to survive it. A woman I know lost her son. I will not tell you the details because they are hers, and they are private and they are sacred. But I will tell you that there is no loss more shattering, more against the natural order, more unfair than a parent outliving a child. There is no script for it. There is no adequate comfort. There is no timeline for recovery. There is nothing I or anyone else can say that makes it okay. It is not okay. It will never be fully okay. And she will tell you that herself. She will tell you that there is a hole in her life that does not close. She will tell you that there are mornings when it is as fresh as the first day. She will tell you that grief like this becomes part of the architecture of who you are. Not a temporary visitor, but a permanent resident. But one that you learn slowly, painfully, with enormous effort to make room for without letting it take up every room. She volunteers now with families who have experienced similar losses. She sits with people in their rawest, most devastated hours and she says almost nothing. She just stays. She told me once that the most important thing she offers is her presence, because her presence says, I have been here in this exact darkness and I am still standing, and that means you can be too. Not that it gets easy, not that it stops hurting, not that the fairness of it becomes any more comprehensible, just that you can bear it, just that you can keep going, just that there is still something worth going for. That is an act of extraordinary courage. Taking your own broken heart and turning it into a lantern for someone else. That is what I mean when I talk about making meaning out of what could have been pure destruction. Happiness for her does not look the way it did before. How could it? She will tell you that with great seriousness, but it exists. It is real. It is chosen every day, not as a denial of the grief, but alongside it, woven into it, coexisting with it in the way that complex, mature, real human experience always involves contradictions, always involves holding more than one truth at once. She is happy, she is grieving. Both of those sentences are true simultaneously. And that is not a paradox. That is just what it means to be fully alive. I want to shift gears and talk about something that I think is one of the greatest thieves of happiness in the modern world. And that is comparison. The endless, exhausting, soul-destroying habit of measuring your life against someone else's. It has always been a human tendency. But social media has turbocharged it into something almost pathological. We are now, for the first time in human history, in constant contact with the curated highlight reels of thousands of people. We see their vacations and their promotions and their engagements and their beautiful children and their beautiful homes and their bodies and their achievements, filtered and lit and captioned and presented for maximum impression. And we compare it to our unfiltered, unlit, raw, messy, complicated, unglamorous inner experience of our own lives. And we feel like we're losing. We feel like everyone else got the instruction manual and we're just improvising. This is the comparison trap, and it is poison. Theodore Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy. He said it in the 19th century, before social media, before smartphones, before the entire apparatus of curated self-presentation that we now swim in. And if it was true then, it is catastrophically more true now. Here is the reality, boo. Every single person whose life looks perfect from the outside is dealing with something on the inside that you don't see. Every single one. The person with the beautiful relationship has had conversations that nearly ended it. The person with the thriving career has had nights of terror wondering if they're a fraud. The person with the perfect body has a complicated, exhausting relationship with food and exercise that you would not want to trade for. The person who always seems happy is working very hard, probably to maintain that appearance and possibly to maintain that reality. And either way, it is not effortless, it is not natural, it is not evidence that they have something you don't. The only comparison worth making is between who you were yesterday and who you are today. That is the only race worth running. Your own, at your own pace, toward your own version of a good life. And your version of a good life might look very different from the version that gets the most likes. That is okay. That is actually wonderful. Because the world needs people who are living intentionally, who have figured out what matters to them specifically, who are building something real rather than performing something impressive. What do you actually want? Not what you think you should want. Not what your parents wanted for you. Not what your culture tells you should make you happy. Not what the person you're secretly comparing yourself to seems to have. What do you, the actual specific irreplaceable human being that you are, what do you actually want your days to feel like? That is one of the most important questions you will ever ask yourself. And most people never ask it. They spend their entire lives chasing a vision of happiness that was built by someone else and marketed to them, and they wonder why, even when they get the things on the list, they still feel empty. Empty on the list, they still feel empty. I spent years doing that. Years. I chased a version of success that I thought would finally make me feel worthy, would finally silence the voice that said I wasn't enough, would finally let me breathe. And I got some of the things on that list, some of the external markers. And I remember the exact moment I realized it wasn't working. I remember standing in a moment that should have felt like a rival. that objectively looked like success, and feeling nothing but a kind of exhausted hollowness, and thinking, if this isn't it, then what is? What am I actually doing this for? That moment of disillusionment was one of the most important of my life because it forced me to stop running long enough to actually ask the question, to actually look inward rather than forward, to ask not what's next, but what's real, what actually matters. What would I choose if I weren't afraid? What would I do if I weren't performing? And the answers scared me because they were so much simpler than the life I'd been building. They were so much quieter. They were about connection, about meaning, about doing work that felt like mine, about being present in my own life rather than perpetually oriented towards some future version of it that would surely be better. Just as soon as I got that next thing. Simplicity is deeply unfashionable in our culture. Quiet joy doesn't generate content. Contentment doesn't drive engagement. But I want to offer you this radical suggestion. The life that looks like the most on a screen and the life that feels the most from the inside are often two entirely different lives. And you get to choose which one you're building. Let me tell you about the concept of post-traumatic growth, because I think it's one of the most important and underreported ideas in psychology. One that has enormous implications for how we understand the relationship between suffering and happiness. We all know about post-traumatic stress. We know that terrible experiences can leave lasting damage, can rewire the nervous system, can create symptoms and struggles that persist long after the event itself. This is real. This is documented. This deserves our compassion and our attention and our very best efforts at healing. But researchers have discovered something else that is equally real, equally documented, and far less discussed, which is that many people, not all, not automatically, but many people in the aftermath of trauma, in the slow, difficult process of rebuilding, discover things about themselves and about life and about what matters that they would not have discovered any other way. They develop deeper relationships because they've been to a place where superficiality is simply no longer sustainable. They develop a clearer sense of purpose because the noise of ordinary life has been burned away and what remains is what is actually essential. They develop a new appreciation for ordinary things, the things that had always been there but that they had stopped seeing. And they develop a kind of resilience, a knowledge of their own capacity to endure, that becomes a quiet bedrock under everything else they do. Post-traumatic growth is not guaranteed. It doesn't happen automatically. It requires, crucially, that you actually process what happened to you, that you don't bury it or numb it or sprint away from it. It requires that you find ways to make meaning, to integrate the experience into your story rather than treating it as an aberration to be erased. It requires community, people who will hold the space for your healing without rushing you through it. But it is real, and it is far more common than we acknowledge, and it suggests something profound about the human spirit, which is that we are not merely capable of surviving the worst things life throws at us. We are, under the right conditions, capable of being deepened and expanded by them, not destroyed. Deepened. That word. Hold on to it. I want to spend some time now talking about forgiveness. Because forgiveness is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot in motivational spaces and often gets either dismissed as naive or misunderstood as something you do for the other person. I want to talk about what forgiveness actually is and why it is one of the most powerful acts of self-love a human being can perform. Forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. It was not okay. It was not okay. What was done to you, the betrayal, the cruelty, the negligence, the injustice, whatever form it took, it was not okay. And it does not become okay just because time passes or because you forgive. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still choose never to speak to them again. You can forgive someone and still hold them accountable. You can forgive someone and still maintain every boundary that keeps you safe. Forgiveness is not for them. This is the one I most want you to understand. So, because most people resist forgiveness because it feels like a gift to the person who hurt them. And they feel like that person doesn't deserve a gift. And that resistance makes perfect sense if forgiveness were for the person who wronged you, but it isn't. Forgiveness is a surgical procedure you perform on your own heart. It is the act of releasing yourself from the prison of resentment. Because here is the thing about resentment. It doesn't punish the person who hurt you. They're out there living their life, possibly without a second thought about what they did to you. While you are here carrying the weight of what they did, letting it define your present, letting it consume your energy, letting it poison your relationship with joy. Resentment is drinking poison and waiting for the other person to get sick. And I know that sounds like a cliche because you've heard it before. But I want you to really feel the cost. Think about someone who wronged you. Maybe it's a parent who wasn't there for you. Maybe it's a partner who betrayed you. Maybe it's a boss who took credit for your work and then undercut you when it mattered. Maybe it's a friend who abandoned you when you needed them most. Think about that person. Now think about how much mental and emotional real estate they occupy. How often they show up in your thoughts uninvited. How the memory of what they did can hijack your mood in an instant, can pull you out of a good moment, can make you tense or sad or furious at the most random, unexpected times. Now ask yourself, does holding on to this hurt you or them? Forgiveness is the act of taking back your real estate, of saying you do not get to live rent-free in my head anymore, of deciding that your present and your future are more important than your grievance, of choosing your own peace over the satisfaction of maintaining your anger. And it is hard, Peter. I will not pretend it's easy. For some wounds, forgiveness is the work of years, not months. For some wounds, it requires professional help, therapy, community, all the support you can access. For the very deepest wounds, forgiveness might be an ongoing practice rather than a single decision. Something you choose again and again as the anger resurfaces and you return to the choice. But the freedom on the other side of it, the lightness, the way the past loses its grip on your present. That is the gift, and you deserve that gift. You deserve it not because you've earned it, or because the person who hurt you deserves your grace, but because you are a living human being with a finite number of days on this earth, and you deserve to live them as freely and as fully as possible. Let me tell you something about the happiest people I know. The ones who have genuinely figured out how to live well in an unfair world. The ones who have this quality of presence, this warmth, this capacity for joy, that draws people to them. These people share a set of characteristics that I have come to think of as the architecture of resilient happiness. The first is gratitude. Not performed gratitude, not the social media gratitude, where you list your blessings for an audience. I mean the private, daily, sometimes effortful practice of actively noticing what is good, even when what is hard is louder. Because our brains are wired for threat detection, they notice problems faster and more persistently than they notice beauty and abundance. This is evolutionary. It kept our ancestors alive. But it means that without intentional effort, your brain will default to cataloging what's wrong, what's missing, what's at risk. Gratitude is the practice of deliberately overriding that default, of choosing each day to look for evidence that life is also good, also beautiful, also worth being in. Not as a denial of the hard things, alongside the hard things. The research on this is extraordinarily robust. So people who maintain a regular gratitude practice report higher levels of happiness, better physical health, stronger relationships, greater resilience in the face of adversity. This is not woo. This is neuroscience. What you repeatedly attend to shapes your brain. And if you repeatedly attend to what is good, your brain becomes more efficient at finding it, more oriented toward it, more capable of resting in it. The second characteristic is connection. Genuine, deep, honest connection with other human beings. Not the number of followers, not the breadth of your network, the depth of a handful of relationships where you are fully known and fully accepted, where you can say the true thing, where you don't have to perform, where you can fall apart and be held. The research on loneliness and health is staggering. Chronic loneliness has physical health consequences comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Social isolation is one of the strongest predictors of depression, cognitive decline, premature death. We are a profoundly social species, and we do not thrive in isolation, no matter how much our culture glorifies independence and self-sufficiency. We need each other. We need to be known. We need to belong to something. And when life is hardest, when the unfairness is most acute, it is connection that carries us through. It is the person who shows up, the voice on the other end of the phone, the shoulder, the presence, the words, I'm here, I've got you, you're not alone. If you don't have that, building it is the most important work you can do. Not because it will make you happy in some shallow sense, but because it will give you the fundamental support structure that makes all the rest of this possible. The third characteristic is purpose. A sense that your life is about something beyond your own comfort and pleasure. Research consistently shows that people who feel their lives have meaning, who feel connected to something larger than themselves, whether that's a cause, a community, a creative mission, a spiritual practice, a dedication to raising children well, whatever form it takes, these people report higher well-being, are more resilient in the face of adversity, recover more quickly from setbacks. Frankl called this the will to meaning. He believed, based not on theory but on observation in the most extreme conditions human beings have ever faced, that the primary drive of human beings is not pleasure or power, but the search for meaning, and that when that search is satisfied, when a person has a why, they can bear almost any how. Why? What is your why? What are you for? What in the world needs your specific contribution? What would be missing from the world if you weren't in it doing what only you can do in the way only you can do it? Those are not small questions. They are the questions that a meaningful life is built on. The fourth characteristic, and I want to spend a little time here because I think it is one of the most underappreciated, is self-compassion. The ability to treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would extend to